Bienvenidos, Ushamdi, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the Spring 2023 semester taking the CTS-233 Section 400 Network Programmability course. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's DEVASC 200-901 Certification Exam Preparation course, and in Lab 6.5.10, we're going to be exploring the evolution of password methods. Now, this lab is way bigger than the title. So here's what you're going to be learning how to do in this lab. We're going to be creating a Python Flask web application in which we're leveraging a SQLite database. So we're going to be actually working with the database, and we're going to have some SQL commands that we're going to be running with that database. We're going to be storing plain text passwords. Then we're going to be storing hashed passwords. And let me give you a little glimpse here, a sneak peek of what you're going to be seeing in a video that I'll be posting up tomorrow morning. And that is how you could take this lab and create a web interface front end for this lab to do everything we're going to be doing with curl commands. So we are actually just going to knock this out of the park, right? Because if we're working with the SQL database, we're using HTTP GET requests and POST requests and whatever those other HTTP methods are going to be. Doesn't it make sense that we would have a web interface that the user could interact with? And that is exactly what we're going to do here. All right, so first, let's get started. And we are going to go line by line through the code that we're going to be working with. Now, the lab starts out, it asks you to install pip3 install. And so if you don't have PyOTP, and that stands for one-time password. And so this is a Python package that we're going to be installing and using. And then, of course, we're also going to be using pip. And you can see the requirements already met. This has already been installed. And we're going to be using Flask. And again, Flask is already installed. So we're good to go. But if you don't have that installed, you could actually go ahead and do this on your box. Now, could you do this on an Ubuntu box, an Ubuntu virtual machine that you've created at your house? You absolutely can. You do not need the DEVASC virtual machine to complete any of the activity that we're going to be doing here today. All right, so now let's dive in and let's take a look at the files that we're going to be working with. Now, the lab starts out and it's going to show you this file here, part 3. And this is where part 3 starts. So what are we doing here? Well, let's go line by line. We've got all of our import statements. We're going to pull in, again, the Python one-time password generator. We're going to pull in the SQLite database, and it's SQLite 3. I'm going to say SQLite from here on out. So it's the SQLite database. And then we've got hashlib, and that's going to create the secure hashes and message digests when we go to do the hashed passwording. And then we've got the UUID, and that's just going to create universally unique identifiers. And then what do? We've seen this before, right? So from Flask, import Flask, the Flask class that's going to give us access to certain methods. And then we pull in the request module from Flask. Do not confuse that with the requests, plural, library that we use for HTTP requests for humans when we're doing the requests.get. This is not that library. So this is a module that's part of the Flask library. So what do we start out with? Well, we instantiate the object, which is just app, which is a Flask object that's going to have the name of the file that we created it with, which is this file right here was part 3-password, etc. Now, this does not create the database. All this is doing is saying the variable db_name is going to have that value. So when we ultimately go to create that database, we'll create a connection to the database. That is what will create the database. Where is the database created? Right here in the file system. And so what that means is that the web app can run and do its thing, and we can interface with that. And if I quit, right, if I stop the web application, the Flask Python app, if I stop that, the database is still there. So if we were to start it back up, then the data is all still there. So we're creating a persistent storage for the data on the local file system. And then what do we have here? Well, we've seen this before. This is simply a decorator, right? The icing on top of the function cake, right? So this def index here, this is a function. Previously, we looked at some things where we saw it could be used with methods. Here, it's just going to be used with the function. Now, this decorator is basically saying, hey, if someone accesses the Flask app, which is our web app, and they try to hit the root of the web directory, we are going to go ahead and run this code, which is basically just going to return a message that says, welcome to the labs for an evolution of password systems. And we've got our famous if dunder name equals dunder main, meaning we're running the application directly. What happens? Our Flask, our object from the Flask class, pulls or executes, calls the run method from the Flask class, and it fires it up on all interfaces on port 5000, and then we've got this new thing down here, this SSL_context. And all that is doing is saying we can run this over HTTPS, there aren't going to be any certificates used. Self-sign, whatever the case may be, we're skipping that, right? So SSL_context ad hoc means, yeah, I can go ahead and type in HTTPS in the browser or in my curl requests, and it's going to work just fine. All right, well, let's fire up the first part of this lab. Let's see what happens when we start this up. And to start it, we simply say Python 3 and then part 3. And I'm going to hit enter. I'm not going to kick it into the background. They show you how to kick it into the background, but we can actually see some messages here. So my Python Flask web app is running. If someone hits the root of the web server, we're going to get this message here. How would we test that? Well, we can easily do that with a curl command, right? So let's say curl-k https : / and then quad zeros, and then colon the port that we're running on, and then the root, port that we're running on, and then the root directory. Let's hit enter. And what do we get back? It returns back to me exactly what the Flask application is told to return back. Now, here's something interesting. Let's go to the browser. Are we going to see anything here in the browser when I say localhost : 5000 and I hit enter? And we don't have anything, right? We're not seeing anything here. And and we're not seeing anything here because HTTPS. There we go. So again, we're not seeing anything here, even when I did HTTPS, and we can go ahead and reload this, right? So and why are we not seeing a web page? Well, remember, it's not rendering a web page. So we're telling our code, and you can see right there, there it is. The HTTP request came in from the local host. It's got the timestamp, the date. What kind of a request was it? It was a GET request. And we got a return code of 200, meaning we are golden. Now, why doesn't it show a web page? Well, because we just have a return of a string here. We're not rendering a web page. Remember, with Flask, we would have to have a render statement or a reference or a reference to some sort of a web HTML file to render something for us. Here, it's just the statement, so curl does exactly what it's supposed to do. Okay, well, how do we kill this? Well, we just simply say, and I'll actually just pull it right back up there because that's the name of the process. So we'll say pkill-f, and that's it. We just killed it. If I come back over to this window here, terminated, done. Now, I could have done Control-C from this window as well, but we're going to skip that. No need for that. All right, so that's the first portion of the lab. I was going to say part, but that's actually part 3. So now we move on to the second portion of the lab. So now that this is working, now we're going to set the lab up to store passwords in a SQLite database that are in plain text. And that database is going to be created right here. If I say ls-l, remember this, you don't see a test.db file here right now. It is going to be here when the database is created. And this is also back to my point where I said, this is not creating a database. It is simply creating a variable name that is holding a string as its value that will ultimately be used to create the database. And the database name will be testDB. All right, so if that's part 3, let's dive in here and take a look at the code for part 4. Again, all of the code at the very top here we've already seen. It's not until we get here that we're going to get some new code. Now, the lab also mentions pulling out the if dunder name equal dunder main. You remove all of that and you remove the app.run, and then you put this new code in is what they want you to do, and then you put all of that if dunder name main app.run at the bottom again. So you don't have to really delete it. Just make sure that you're putting all of the new code for the plain text passwords before that statement right there. This statement right here needs to be at the bottom of this file. So let's take a step back because now things are going to escalate here. We're going to be looking at some SQL commands, and we are going to walk through this. We're going to crush this right here. You're going to walk away from this lab saying to yourself, I need to be using a SQLite database for all kinds of stuff to store all kinds of things, and this is exactly how you're going to end up doing that. All right, so let's dive in here. So again, there's my decorator, the icing on top of my function cake that says if someone accesses the app.route, the Flask web app, and they don't go to the root directory, they go to signup/version1. And again, we're creating this right here. I could say signup/version 99, right? But it's just version 1. And now we define the HTTP methods that when you go to this page, this is supporting. And so the methods that this is supporting are the HTTP post, because we're going to be posting a username and a plain text password to the SQL database. Now, we're going to be using curl commands again because this lab is not doing anything with the web interface. But when you think about it, that's what you would want. You'd want users to be able to hit that web interface, type in their username, type in their password, and have it stored. So let's dive in here. So when someone goes to localhost :5000/signup/v1 with the curl command, it's going to execute this function. And the function name is just simply signup_v1. Well, what is it doing? Well, we're going to create a SQLite connection object. And the name of that object is con, C-O-N-N. That's just a variable name, right? Now, I could name this anything, but this is a best practice convention here. We're going to use con. And it's going to get the name, or I'm sorry, it's going to get the object from the SQLite 3 class when we use the connect method. And so what are we doing? We're creating a SQL database object that is connecting to what? To DB_name. Yeah, the variable we created in the first script. This is the command that creates the database on the local file system. And again, in this directory, right? In the directory that we're currently in. Now, this is what kind of throws learners is when they see this. They then see the C object, the C variable name here, which again is creating an object. But what's the object of? Well, it's a cursor that we're attaching, right? That's going to be attached to this object con. So we create the object con, which connects us and creates that database, instantiates the database. But that's not good enough with SQL or SQLite. With SQLite, right, we need a cursor object so that we can execute commands. And I want you to think of this cursor object as nothing more than a cursor on a CLI, right? It's just an object that represents a cursor on the CLI that we can then say, hey, on the CLI, cursor, execute this SQL command, right? And so what is the SQL command here? Well, we're executing the creation of the database. So if someone goes here and this database doesn't exist, it will be created. And what are we going to do? We can create a table in that database, because that's what databases are all about. They're about tables. And in those tables, we got rows and we got columns. Now, ours is going to be very simple, and we're going to be able to look at the DB browser for SQLite to see exactly what that looks like. And so what this says is, hey, from the CLI cursor, execute this SQL command. If the table doesn't exist named user_plain for plain text passwords, hey, create that for me. And username text primary key not null. So we're going to have a username that's going to be it's got to be text, and it's a primary key that cannot be null. And then we're going to have the password, right? So we're creating the columns in the database table. We're creating a username column. We're creating a password column. And then we commit that. Now, it's not C commit, it's the connection, right? Based off this object that we've created that has connected us to the database, we are committing the changes. Now, once the database has been created, when someone goes here to do the sign up, now we get down to our try except. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to try this. Now, try and accept go together, because we haven't really seen these a lot, but what this does is we're going to try this command, and if that command bombs and goes sideways, okay, that's okay. The program is not going to explode. We're going to have this exception that catches the SQL error that would have been produced by the try. And then we return the following. Username's already been registered, meaning somebody else has already registered that username. And then we're going to print out, and then we would return that, and then we would print out the username request form, and I'll get to this code down here in a second. So that's what the try except is. So what are we trying? Well, from the CLI with the cursor object, we're going to execute. And what are we going to do? We're going to insert into the user plain table the value for the username and the password. Where are these values coming from? Right here. Here are the values. So this value statement right here, this is a string, and we're using the string format method, which is one of the reasons I've been using that over and over and over again. And here, for the first time, we see the numbers in between the curly braces. And remember, what do those numbers correspond to? Well, again, we're simply saying that request.form username, and I'll talk about this in a second, and then this is going to be the one value. And so what would these values equal that we're going to pass or insert into the user_plain SQL database table? Username, right, which is right there, and password, which is right here. And so this is how those values are getting inserted into the database. So what is this? Request.form. Well, remember, this is not requests plural like we've used in our Module 4 activities. This is coming from the Flask class. And what this does is, if you had an HTML form that the user would be filling in with their username and password, this says, hey, get that from the form. Now, we're sending it in with a curl command, right? So that's how the username and the password are going to be derived. But if you had the HTML on the front end of this, which is becoming a more and more sort of attractive option here, if you had an HTML front end, this would take that form field for the username and the form field for the password and insert it into your database. All right, let's clear this out here and let's continue on, because we've got some ground to cover. So we're trying that. If that bombs out, and then we commit it, right? We commit those values to the database with our connection SQL database object using the commit method for that database object. And again, remember, that's why it's not the cursor that's doing this. We're saying This represents the database. We are committing the database. All right, if that goes sideways, we've got the exception here. And now we're going to come down and we're going to print username request.form. And so there it is again. We're just simply doing the request.form and getting the username and printing that. And then the password is whatever was the password field. And then we're going to return sign up success. Remember, if the try succeeds, we come down here and run this. We don't do the exception code. Okay, so that's if we've got success. Now, we've got this next function here, which is verify plain username and password. So this is verifying the plain text password. So you create a connection to the database, right? We've got a cursor object that gets created so that we can query. In other words, we're selecting the password row from, or field from the user underscore plain database table where the username is, and there's the format method with the string again. So it's just basically saying, hey, look in the database for me, and specifically the table user underscore plain, and find for me the row that has whatever has been entered in for the username. So when verify underscore plain is called, which is going to happen here in a second, you can see it's right down here, right? When that function gets called, this is the code that's going to run. And so all it's doing is looking in the database to check to see if that username is already in the database. And then our CLI object is going to execute a query. And the query is going to create, and then the query, and actually let me take a step back here because this is a very important step right here. So this is going to create what's referred to as, and I don't want to call it a query object, but it's going to come back with, and maybe we should call it query object. Well, it's basically going to execute this command and it's going to run a query, right? And so into that variable, we are going to, and these two lines here are kind of together. And again, it's kind of escaping me right now, the correct text here. But what's happening is we're retrieving the rows, right, from that query by saying fetch one. So again, these are kind of related, right? So we do the query and we're using the cursor, we execute the query and we capture what's returned from the query, right? When we did that select password into, and again, I apologize here because it's not capturing, like records is we're going to query what gets returned here and capture it. And we're fetching one. We're just fetching the next record. We're retrieving the next row in the database is all we're doing here. And then we're closing that connection that we use to query. And so if not records, and so what does this mean? Well, if we don't find from fetching it, if we don't get a row back, right? If we get nothing back, then we're going to return false. Otherwise, we're going to return the record that we received at index position 0. And we only received one. We did fetch 1, so it's going to be index position 0 from the records list that gets returned. And then we're returning the records list set to the password, right? Equal to that password. And so now we get down, we're kind of getting toward the end of the code here. And so this is our last decorator where we say app route. So if they go to the login, and the login supports both get and post HTTP methods. And so what do we have? We have this function here. Error gets set to none. So if request.method is a post request. So if it's a post request, we verify plain. We call this function right up here that we just walked through, and we do a request on the form for the username and the password. And if the error is login success, right? If the error, error would be assigned the value of login success, right? Otherwise, error is going to be assigned invalid username or password. Because again, we're trying to verify, are they here? And then we've got this other outside else that's going to say invalid method. And that's tied to this. Meaning if I send a put, or if I send a delete, or if I send a patch, we're going to see invalid method. And then we return whatever error is equal to at that, or whatever value error has at that point. And then we run the code. So let's run the code here and let's see what happens. So I'll pull this back up, and then we're simply going to say part 4, and we kick that off. Oops, sorry, I got something wrong. And I said part 4. Sorry about that. I wanted to say Python 3 part 4, and we're going to start this up. So we say Python 3 and then part 4. So our Flask app is running. Let's jump over here because, again, we're in the same directory for both. And take a look at, oh, well, it's not here yet because it hasn't been called yet. So we still don't see testdb, but we are about to. So for part 4, there's some curl commands that we want to run now. So, and I've already got these queued up so that we don't have to type all this in. So here's the first one, right? We're sending a post request in. And I'm pretty sure that's what they wanted us to start with here because we'd already done the get. So we're going to send the post request in. And what's it going to do? Well, we're going to sign up, right? We're going to sign up this user, Alice, and that's going to be the password. And that's the curl command to make that happen. But I'm going to pull up just short here when I do my copy because for some reason, when you try to copy down to the next line, it does not like that. So I'm going to say sign up, and then it's V1, and then we close that. So I hit enter, and you can see, what do we get back? Well, we get sign up success because that user didn't already exist. So what happens if that user already exists? I run it again, and we should get something that comes back and tells us that the user already exists. And it looks like it might be pausing here on me for a second. And that should have come back way before that. So I'll do a Control-C there. Let me kick that off again, because it should come back and tell us that the user is already there. All right, so it didn't like that. So we'll circle back to that because we should see that the user already exists. So let's take a look at our database browser here. Actually, first we can say ls, and now I have a persistent SQLite database here. So if I pull the browser up and I go to Open Database, Open TestDB, we get a visual representation of the tables. There's a user plain table, and then here are the rows in that table, username and password. And this happened when the when the SQL database was created. If I click on Browse Data, let's take a look at the data here. Well, there's the user Alice, and that's Alice's password. So right now we only have one table, user plain. That's about to change. But before we do that, let's go ahead and run some of these other curl commands here. So I'm going to say P4, S3, and it should have come, it should have come back and told you that that user already created. So we're going to create this user here. So we'll say copy and then paste, and we hit enter, and we should get a successful sign up here. And if we don't, it looks like we might have an issue. And again, I'm putting in this other command here. We might have something up with the database. Let's check and see what we're seeing over here. So the first sign up worked. And then it looks like, it looks like the second sign up, let me refresh here. Yeah, the second sign up did not go through. And that's interesting because this had all been tested and was working without a hitch. And so I'm debating how long I wait to see if it's simply just something is running slow here with the database instance, or if we try to dig into that database instance. Because again, this should have taken, let me do a Control-C there. Okay, let's grab this last one and see what happens. And it looks like the database might be hanging up on us here. And let's type in paste and let's hit enter. And it should come back almost instantaneously. So it looks like something might be wrong. So let's do this. Time for some troubleshooting. Let's kill the process here. And again, I can just simply say Control C, and that's it. We're out of here. And let's first try this. Let's restart it. All right, so there we go. It's running on port 5000. So if I was to call this command back up here, yeah, that's how quickly it should come back. So I signed up Bob. There we go. So something just hung up with that SQLite database. I signed up myself, and then let's get Alice signed up in here. Where was Alice at? There. Username has already been registered. Okay, so something was definitely up with the SQL database. So don't panic. Kill the web process, or kill the Flask web app, and then refire it up. So now, when we clear our screen here, let's come over here. We should see the logs. Take a look at this. 3 post requests, all with HTTP response codes of 200. We are golden. And look at what happened here, right? It also logged the username and their password in clear text. So let's take a look at our browser for the SQL database. We'll just do a little refresh right here. All of our users are in our user_plain SQL database table. Fantastic. What about the database structure? Well, the structure's still the same, right? We've got, there's our table, and username text not null, password text not null. All right, so now let's wrap things up here. We're going to kill this process right here, and we're going to, actually we can do it from right in here. Let's take a look at the code that we would add in for part 5, which is going to be the hashing of the passwords. So you could now create an application that prompts the user for their username and password in your Python script, and then can pass that information into the SQL database for storage, for persistent storage here in your file system. And like I said, that web interface, that pretty cool looking web interface, I'm going to be posting that up first thing in the morning. I'm going to be walking through that code and show you what's happening there. But let's wrap up part 5 right here. And again, this is going to be as simple as coming down to the hashed passwords. And this should be pretty quick at this point, because this is, again, this is kind of review. So what does this decorator do when someone comes in to sign up version 2? That's where they're heading, right? The path that they're taking on the web server, if that's where they go, we support get and post methods. Now, the function name is signup v2. And if that's where they go, the decorator, the icing on the function cake, is going to send them into this function. We're going to create a SQL database connection. We're going to create a cursor for that connection to put us onto the CLI. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to execute the creation of this database table if it doesn't already exist. If it already exists, I'm just simply going to go ahead and do my, oh, actually, if it already exists, I'm going to go ahead and do the commit. Yeah, the commit's going to run irrespective of whether it exists or whether we execute the creation of it or not. We're going to commit. And then I'm going to come into my try except. So I'm going to try to do this, right, using hashlib and using the .SHA-256 method from that class. And we're going to store that in this hash_value, which at the end of the day gets used on our SQL CLI object that executes the insertion of that hash based on what? Yeah, request.form password, and we do this hex digest, encode hex digest magic at the end here. But again, it's super straightforward in terms of what we're doing. And so then we execute the insertion of that information into our user_hash table, which gets created. And what are we inserting in? The username and then the password that's in the hashed format. What are the values? Well, yeah, there we go. We're using the format method from the string class again. 0 is the username. 1 refers to the hash value. And then we commit that to the database if that all works. If that all doesn't work, then the program doesn't explode. We simply return back, hey, username has already been registered, like we saw once we sorted out the SQL 3 database. And then we're going to print out the username. And we're going to use that request.form and the request.form password and username. We're going to use that, not attribute, that, I'm drawing the method. Sorry. We're going to, well, actually, technically, we're going to use that module. Sorry, I was thinking method module. We're going to use that module, and we're going to call the form, not really the method, right? But we're going to get this information from that form. And then we're going to return sign up success if everything does what it's supposed to do. All right. And again, remember, when we hit that, to be clear, if this goes sideways, remember, we're inside of a function here. So if it goes sideways and that return statement executes, we're out of that function. This, we never get to that code. And I think I meant, if I didn't say that before, earlier, and I wasn't clear earlier up in the first one, and I don't think I was, let's be clear about that. If this try fails and we come into the accept, that runs, you're done. You never see that get printed, and we never return sign up success because it didn't succeed, it failed. So I apologize if I wasn't clear about that earlier. All right, so now we've got a function. Just like we had the verify password, the verify up above, you've got verify hash. And so again, we're going to walk through the same thing. The code looks almost identical. We're selecting hash from the user hash table where the username is whatever format username. So whatever that value is right here. And then we're going to get onto the CLI. We're going to execute a query. And from that query, I'm going to fetch the first row or the next row in that query. And we're going to store that in the variable name records. And then I'm going to close my connection out. And so then if it's not in the records, return false. And boom, we're out of here. But if this is false, right? If it is in the records variable, which is that row from the database, we return the first element of the records list, and it equals what we pull out there. Oh, we're returning record 0 when it's equal to the hashlib password.encode hex digest. And then that would get returned. And then we've got this last function right here. And what is this all about? Yep, login. So instead of the first decorator, the first decorator, which would have taken us to, and it's not moving, there we go, would have taken us to the sign up v2, right? To get us signed up. This is all about login. And so we can validate that the actual user and hash password exist by trying to log in. And so if they go to login v2 on our Flask app, and that's the route to the web server that they're taking, we support get and post methods. And here's the function that's going to run. And we're setting error to none. So if the request.method, right, is equal to post, then we're going to try to verify that the hash is correct, right? Otherwise, we're going to say invalid username password. And if this is not true, meaning it's not a post, we're going to say error, invalid method, and then we're going to say return error, right? And this is running the program. So let's wrap this up. And we have gone through a whole bunch of stuff here, even saw the SQL database crash. So let's say Python 3, part 5, and there we go. So we're up and running now. Now what did the lab want us to do? Well, the lab wanted us to go ahead and, oops, sorry, I was in that tab. The lab wanted us to go ahead and run some more curl commands. But now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sending in our requests to not the sign up v1 or the login v1. We're sending it to login v2 and sign up, v2, which means we want that to be hashed. And so we could use the same name, but they've got us using some different names here. So let me go ahead and say part 5, and part 5, section 3, I think is what I meant to say there. So here are the curl commands they want us to run. So let's grab this first one right here. Remember, we're accessing sign up version 2. So when we go to that resource, sorry, when we go to that resource on the web server, and hopefully this doesn't hang up here. All right, it looks like it doesn't like what's happening here. So let's kill it. Let's start it again. And it's funny, when I tested this and I walked through the same steps, it didn't actually do that. So let's just give it a quick jump start there. And there we go, sign up success. So if you get stuck, hey, kill it, restart it, and then I should be able to rip and run right through these here. So let's grab our next one, our next curl command, copy. And let's paste that right here. And let's see sign up success. And take a look at that. Sign up success, looking good. And maybe in our code, we want to put a new line of carriage return here, because this is kind of funky, right? That's kind of not looking good. That's a bad look. But let's come all the way down here to sign up. Let's copy this. Let's come down here. Let's paste that code in here. And again, it wrapped. And so that's why V2, we wanted to do this. So now we've got these users that are signed up. Well, let's take a look at our database browser here. Let's go ahead and go to browse data. So when I click refresh here, hey, where are all the hash passwords? And this is usually the most common question I get from learners is they come in, they start clicking refresh. Oh, something's not working. Something's broke. Come back over here and they're like, well, yeah, I've got my hash plain. And oh, wait, well, this looks new. I'm sorry, user hash looks new, right? I see user plain, but well, that looks new. Well, why? I don't see that over here. Well, it's right here. So just click right there and pick the new SQL database table. That's all you got to do. Now let's drag that over. There's Rick, there's Alan, there's Dave, and there is their SHA-256 hash password. Now, if we take a look at the log, right, you might be wondering, well, what's the log doing? Yeah, we're no longer seeing the plain text passwords anymore. Everything we're seeing now is hashed, right? So much more secure, and you saw how easy it was to do that. So now let's go back to our curl commands, because now the next set that they want us to run are the login commands, right? And we sign up and then we log in to validate, right? We log in to validate that, hey, I can get logged in, and this is looking at my SQL database and it's pulling my username password combo and it's legit. So we're going to look at more P5S3D. Sorry about that. Terrible naming convention here. All right, so here are the commands. Now, my hope is we don't have to start and stop here. So let's grab this. Let's say copy, and then let's drop this in with a paste. And I hit enter. And lo and behold, we'll do a Control-C there. Let's come over here, and we're going to go ahead and Control-C and then start it back up. And then jump back over here to see if that's actually... There you have it. So we were able to validate, right? So I had to stop and start the database again, not the end of the world. So there we go. We've got login success there. Let's run the next one. So now we're going to do a curl command here, and we're putting the wrong password in for Alan. So this would check using that function to see, did Alan enter in the correct password? And I'll put paste, an invalid username password. So that's where that text in that Python file is coming into play. So now we're going to copy this, which is Alan with the same password, and we'll put paste, login success. So that works. So you can see that it didn't work when bogus information got entered in. Then I'm going to come all the way right to here. We're going to copy this. We're going to paste it in, and we're going to do the rest of the V2 and the V2 and the single quote and login success. All right, well, we have absolutely crushed it here on Lab 6510. Again, I ran a little bit long, and I apologize, but I wanted to get all of this into a single video. So now you know how to do plain text passwords with a SQL database. Got to take a look at why the database is acting funky like that, because it was not doing that earlier. And final check, if I say ls, there is my database. And we've seen if I take the web app down, that when I fire it right back up, all that information is still persistently being tracked and kept in this SQL database. So, one final plug here. This is what we're going to be taking a look at, which is using the exact same Python Flask web app, but we front end it with an HTML website. All right, well again, that does it for Lab 6510. Have a great evening. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I hope to see you in the next video.